They say that logic is a thread that holds our world together. We like to think that we are logical, that we argue with reason, and that we build a belief from facts, not feelings. But the truth is, our minds are full of shortcuts, the path of least resistance, and sometimes that path twists logic into traps, also known as logical fallacies. A fallacy, by definition, is a mistaken belief, especially one based on unsound arguments. You've seen them before, in debates that go nowhere, in politics that spin in circles, and in certain supposed intellectual conversations. And with that, today we're going to talk about them. Not exactly all, but some of them. The first on our list is the strawman fallacy, or refuting an argument different from the one actually under discussion. So my friend Jimmy and I were talking about public safety for some reason, to which I bring up that cars under the wrong hands are dangerous. My wonderful friend Jimmy then claims, based on what I just said, that I want to ban all cars. There is an extreme leap of logic there by good old Jimmy, which not only doesn't refute my point, but also changes it to something else entirely. That is basically a straw man, avoiding a point and changing it into something completely different for an easy argument win. Good job, Jimmy. Next up, we have the red herring fallacy, or something that misleads or distracts from a relevant or important point. This fallacy, at least compared to the previous, is more common than you might think. The red herring is like a diversion. In fact, the term originates from using strong-smelling fish, like a red herring, as a distraction to dogs following a scent trail. This fallacy is kinda like the straw man, but just like the dog, it's more of a distraction that's somewhat more subtle than the previous. So a couple days ago, I asked my 100% real brother, Joe, to wash the dishes. And in response to that, he tells me, "Why do I have to do the dishes? Remember that time when you ate my salad?" My dear brother Joe, instead of doing the dishes, puts forth a response which makes you wonder, what does the salad gotta do with the dishes? And that is a red herring. A deflection of the main point onto something that seems equal but is actually irrelevant in the context of the situation. Yet again, thanks Joe. The next one is one of my favorites, the slippery slope fallacy, or an argument that suggests one action will inevitably lead to a series of increasingly negative consequences, ultimately leading to an undesirable outcome, just like a slippery slope or a domino. This one is also very common, because the conclusions that some of these points come to sound logical, but usually, after much thought, isn't, and just places the person that came up with the point in an extreme circumstance. In fact, Jimbo, who is Jimmy's little brother, just told me yesterday that if he fails his exams, his grades will drop, which will then stop him from going to a good college, and he'll be jobless for life. No, Jimbo, the exam isn't gonna make you jobless for life. Trust me, and that leap of logic is kinda insane, buddy. Just like a slippery slope, the longer you're on it, the faster you're going down. The leap of logic is too extreme, which causes the conclusion to sound highly exaggerated, even if to some small degree, it might be potentially, like 0.1%, logical. The next fallacy is one which I greatly despise, and that is the appeal to authority fallacy, which as the name suggests, is when someone claims that their statement is true simply because they are an authority figure, regardless whether the authority is relevant to the topic or if there's any other evidence to support the claim. Just yesterday, my boss James told me that apples were blue, but they are red. Apples are red. So logically, I brought him an apple and showed it to him. Long story short, there's a reason I do YouTube full-time now. All jokes aside, this fallacy is used almost on the daily, and is woven deep into our society. And the unfortunate reality is that there are genuinely people who lose their livelihoods or are affected by their jobs, regularly by bosses who commandeer this fallacy. Alright, moving along. Next we have the correlation-causation fallacy. Simply put, one event being the result of the occurrence of another event. Sunburns correlating with ice cream sales, and a manager believing that an employee working longer hours has higher productivity are some common examples. No, ice cream doesn't increase sunburns, and no, working longer doesn't actually increase productivity. Correlation and causation imprints implications on certain statements even though it isn't true, and as with the examples, it isn't as uncommon as it should be. Moving on to another fallacy which I'm far too familiar with, the appeal to emotion fallacy. This fallacy, as implied by the name, is using an emotional statement to win an argument over using logic or evidence. Technically, this can also be a form of manipulation in some cases, when said party is trying to influence another's feeling or emotion rather than through reasoning and facts. Unfortunately, this is also a very common fallacy. When the teacher says something like, "You wouldn't want a bad grade, would you?" to invoke a sense of fear into a student. Or when a salesperson tells a parent, "Imagine how happy your child would be with this toy," which is an attempt to invoke a sense of joy. Sometimes this fallacy can be harmless, but when a figure of authority, like a parent or a teacher, knowingly or unknowingly uses this fallacy on a child, it could have negative consequences in the long run. Next up, we have the bandwagon fallacy, a fallacy which claims something is true because many people believe it, like jumping in a bandwagon, even if said claim isn't backed up by any evidence. This fallacy is becoming more and more prevalent in our digital age. More and more people are making purchases because of popularity instead of necessity, or jumping onto different social media platforms because that is the current trend. As the world progresses towards even greater connectivity, jumping on the bandwagon will become a more frequent behavior. Just look at the queues and crowds every time a new phone is released. The price point is like $2,000, and the crowds it gathers is actually insane. Moving swiftly along, we have the false dichotomy fallacy. Basically, it is a fallacy where only two options are presented as possibilities when more exist. One of the most famous examples is the phrase, "You're either with us or against us," which ignores being neutral or disagreeing without being adversarial. Last week, yet again my friend Joe said to me, "Either I go to a good college or I'm gonna be a failure for life." Well, thank God Joe hasn't found this channel. This fallacy exists all around us, many times a day in fact, when we have decisions that seemingly only have two options, yet after thinking further, you may realize that there's actually a third or maybe even a fourth option. And now, on to the final fallacy, at least for this video. The circular reasoning fallacy. This logical fallacy is when a person begins with what they're trying to end with. Sounds complicated, so let me explain. I'm sure we have all seen those advertisements that say something like, "Our brand is the best because it is better than the others." Or certain people saying, "My grandpa's been smoking since 16 till he passed at 90, so there's no way cigarettes are that bad." Yeah, all those are circular reasoning fallacies. Like in the brand example, assuming that because a brand is better than others, it is the best, without any external evidence to justify the point. All in all, this fallacy is one of the most common ones as well. People do it all the time without realizing it, and it is somewhat normalized and accepted in our society. And with that, in conclusion, yes, there are a lot of fallacies, and many more that I didn't cover in this video. But at the end of the day, I would like to quote my favorite YouTuber of all time, ever, probably, maybe, probably not. Yeah, probably not. Anyways, Ben Shapiro and his famous quote, "Facts and logic don't care about your feelings. But here at Topisphere, I do." Thank you for watching.